Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Cool. Alright guys, thanks for coming along. Not sure if anyone's been here before, but I just want to give a quick introduction to Startup Grind and what we do. So Startup Grind started back in 2010, I think, in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, if you like, by a guy by the name of Derek Anderson, and it was really just one of these humble sort of meetup groups that kind of just evolved, and now it's in I think 60 plus cities around the world, and it's really just about as the banner here says, educating, inspiring, and connecting with people in the city. And this is what we're trying to do, trying to bring to Sydney. So Adam and I think in 2012 we were over in San Francisco pitching an idea to a couple of investors at the time. We went to just a startup run event. At the time it wasn't even outside of the US, and Derek was like, hey, what do you guys do for a living? Do you want to bring it to Australia? And I said, sure, why not? And 18 months later, we're here. We've kind of interviewed some of the biggest guys in Australian startups like Matt Barry, Scott Farquhar from Atlassian, and many more. So, but yeah, every startup grind's an interesting experience. So I really thank you for all coming along. This one's a bit more intimate, and I think Adam called Chris last night, and he said to Chris, "Hey Chris, I think the numbers are kind of down compared to previous startup grinds that we've had in the past. Like, do you need to push it on? Can you push it on Pedestrian on your own website, or is there anything we can do, or should we postpone it?" And I'm being completely frank with you guys. And Chris is, from what I hear from that, Chris is like, dude, I don't care. Like, if there's one person, and one person, here's a good story, I'm happy to be here. So, testing to that, here's Chris.
That doesn't mean you can all walk out.
But for those who don't know who Chris is, so Chris is kind of your young achiever, was your young achiever back in the day, and I don't want to say you're old now, but where I'm going with this is he was kind of the forward thinker back then when the internet was kind of getting started, kind of getting hot, and he had that vision to sort of say, hey, this is going to be a platform where business is done in terms of media, advertising, fashion, all sorts. And was it 10 years, 12 years?
9 and a bit, so getting close to 10.
10. And for an online startup or for a website, that's pretty hard to do. So Chris has done some pretty amazing things to get here. So I want Chris to tell you his story before we get started. So Chris, let's just rewind back to day dot. Before even Pedestrian. Tell me who you were, what you did back then.
Day dot, I suppose. First of all, I think there was a lot of nice things said there. I don't know if I can quite live up to that, but I'll do my best. For me, day dot was probably like my first memories of. I'm not going to start from when I was in nappies and stuff, because it just get boring. But I grew up and spent most of my life in Sydney. I was born in London. That's much backstory as you probably need. But I mean, I suppose we mentioned the internet. For me, my initial memories were sort of staying up late at friends' houses on ICQ chats and chat rooms, and downloading songs off Napster, and just starting to see the impact that this thing was having. You could speak to amazingly hot girls who happen to be up at 4 a.m. at night, just like you, or probably just dudes just like you, or could download all this great music and discover all this this multitude of music that previously you couldn't find because if it wasn't in the local Brushes or H&B or all these stores that no longer exist, you didn't have access to it. And so, but the crazy thing was that was in the late mid and late 90s, and it really took a long time, I think, for that to kind of catch on with entrepreneurs. And I think for a lot of ways for the infrastructure around the internet to actually catch up, and things like broadband speeds, which in Australia we're still trying to catch up on to get to the point where we need to be. And so it was only really probably about the mid-2000s that we started to see startups really starting to blossom in Australia. And to be honest, it probably then even took about 5 years for that to really get to where we are now, where we have co-working spaces like fish burners and things like that where people can come and collaborate and listen to talks and meet each other and connect over pizza and drinks. In terms of my personal story, I was always the kid that was really entrepreneurial at school. I had all these like little schemes of things, of ways to make money and little ridiculous stuff that I would come up with. Me and a friend ran a book on the Melbourne Cup while we were at school, so we would literally when the Melbourne Cup rolled around, we'd take bets and hope to hell that that one horse, that if it won, we'd lose a lot of money, but if any other horse won, we'd win. And there would be things like that, or a friend of mine joined like a car club, like people got together and sort of hung out and compared cars or something. It wasn't really my bag, but I noticed that they were really into custom number plates, so I started kind of buying custom number plates and then trying to sell them in the classified sections of the papers. None of these early schemes took off, but I was always really interested in the entrepreneurial side of things. At the same time, I was really creative. I loved art, I loved listening to music. I played with bands in high school and through university, and that was something that really appealed to me. So I was kind of drawn to marketing and sales. I think as a kind of career, marketing especially, because for me it was sort of somewhere where creativity and business sort of came together, and that probably led me to where I am now, which is kind of in publishing, because again, publishing is it is an environment in which creativity and business come together, and it's something that has I guess led us to the formation of Pedestrian. I had some early jobs in kind of marketing and advertising for about a year after I left university. So I left uni at 21. I went to UNSW, did commerce, and then had a couple of jobs over my first year since leaving school, and then met my business partner at the University of Canberra. We were just throwing around ideas and kind of going, what can we do? And we had this idea of, that was a similar insight to probably what birthed YouTube, which in hindsight, much more successful business than Pedestrian. But it was basically we were looking around and kind of going that there wasn't any niche, interesting video content, out there. So there was all these, bands would go and, we'd go to their concerts, or there was these fashion labels that would go and, we'd be wearing their clothes and in their stores, and people would be talking about them on the street and, amongst each other. But you couldn't see videos of any of these people because all the video content back in 2004, 2005 was controlled by TV stations. And if something's not masked, then TV's not really interested. So, back then there was about 4 or 5 companies in Australia making video content, on a regular basis. So we sort of said, well, can we take all this digital video equipment that's starting to emerge and create our own stories and distribute them in interesting and innovative ways? And we came up with the idea of distributing DVDs. So we started off distributing free DVD magazines, was the first concept, and that was how Pedestrian was kind of born. So it was born as a 60-minute DVD that used to be distributed in the same way that you kind of see street press magazines in kind of stores and bars and universities, cafes, places like General Pants. And we did that for the first few years of the business. And I think like any good startup, we were kind of always looking for times, any opportunity to kind of stay alive, both, probably literally and, figuratively as a business. And so, we would kind of, I think we really embodied that term, like just hustling to kind of, find any way to kind of bring money in so that we didn't have to go back and work freelance or get bar jobs and do that. Like we really sort of, were fixated on making this thing work, and we were doing it. I was going to say Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, but really the hours were quite horrendous. If you look back, in the early days, there was times where we had 50 hours with no sleep, and we'd done an all-nighter, and then we backed up the next morning and then worked through the next day, and we literally did almost an all-night the next day. But yeah, we started doing club nights to kind of keep the brand alive. And, that started to connect with an audience. We started to do lots of video content. We did a lot of work with brands, and then finally after a few years, we launched the website, and that started to get traction. Pretty early on from an audience, and it's grown considerably year on year. We keep adding new elements to the website. So the news element of the website launched in around 2007, 2008. We launched a jobs platform off the back of it to help people in kind of creative industries find people to connect with in 2010. We launched an online education section of the site. So it's called Pedestrian Coach, and it helps people kind of connect with anyone from startup founders to people have made it and kind of created careers in fashion and music, photographers and illustrators. And it's most of the talks are free, some of them are being paid, and we run that on the site. That launched in 2013, and we kind of keep continuing to like grow and try new things. And Pedestrian started as the two of us, me and Oscar, the co-founder of the business, and there's now almost 25 people in kind of Sydney and Melbourne, and the business is doing really well. It's been kind of profitable since day one, because we actually have probably quite a different story from a lot of the people in this startup world, because like we never actually took on outside funding. We always kind of funded the company from the profits that we were kind of making, and from the small amounts of cash initially, and now I guess like the slightly larger amounts of cash that we're kind of making through the business. So that was the really slightly different answer. So
that's awesome. I want to backtrack a little bit. I want to talk about it.
Okay, we're going to
expand. But I want to talk about from starting a business point of view. How did you and Oscar sort of actually say, okay, we're going to start a website? Did you have the skill set to actually do that? And once you did, how did you actually try to stay afloat? How did you make money? What were the kind of things that you did? Because I know a lot of friends that have tried to create websites and online businesses and have done the opposite and not stayed afloat.
Yeah.
So what made you stand out?
I think I mentioned like saying yes to everything. That was a big thing that we did. Like you need to be really flexible, willing to pivot, willing to take on board almost any opportunity in the early days of your business. We said yes to some crazy stuff, and it opened up our skill set. It made us, we'd say yes to things we didn't know how to do, and then we'd just work out how to do it. We said we had, like 2006 or 2007, Smirnoff was like, "Can you make us a TV show?" We were like, "Yes," and then we were like, "How do we make a TV show?" But we worked it out, and we did a TV show for them. It performed really well. Or we had people come to us, in the early days, we go, "Can you make us a website?" And we were like, "Well, yes, I guess we can," and like you just learn things. I mean, everyone didn't know how to do something at day one. Mark Zuckerberg at some point in his life didn't know how to code a website, and he learned how to do it. So I think have faith in yourself and like your abilities and your ability to learn, and the fact that you guys are all here means you're open to kind of trying to learn new skills and find out new ways of doing things. So tap into that. Hustle, like want it more than anyone else. Don't expect things to come to you. You need to just be going out there and selling yourself, selling your product, believing in what you're doing, 100%. And it's similar to hustling, but just being like, and it's somewhat a dirty word, I think, in kind of like the startup universe a bit, because I think people kind of expect that we will create a product and all of a sudden the people will come and they'll be so excited about it and it's going to go viral and it's, you're going to have this exponential growth curve. But if your business is, has any traditional elements to it, and even if it is a, really scalable tech business, you're still going to need to sell the pants off it to someone, whether it's the media and to press and just hustle harder for those interviews and for that coverage, or whether it's to customers or whether it's to investors. You're going to have to sell it to someone, and I think you kind of need to really tap into that part of yourself that is that kind of like inner salesperson that can kind of connect with people. Again, sales is like a really like a kind of like a dirty word, but I never saw myself as being a kind of salesy type of guy at all. And I'm still quite awkward when it comes to that stuff, but I'm really passionate about my product. I know it inside out, and I think that I can add value to people's businesses. Most of our revenue comes from advertising, and we have to go in and kind of sell those campaigns and the work that we do with brands directly to them. But whatever your product, you're going to have to sell it to someone. So I think kind of getting good and getting comfortable with that, and just knowing that sales is just about solving problems for people, which is what starting any business is about. And it's fine. Find out what someone else's challenges are and how you can solve them. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. And so in terms of why we thought we could do it, because we were young and just why not? Like, I think we were kind of looking at probably, the jobs that we had, and we sort of said, well, if I do this for the rest of my life, it's not going to necessarily make me happy, and I'll always be kind of questioning, going, well, why didn't I do it? Like, why didn't I leave and start up this business or like go out and take that chance? Because I mean, depending which papers you read and things like that, the job market's actually not too bad. And for the most part, if you leave and you go off and you try something for like 12 months or 6 months and you save up the money to do it, then you've at least got that period in your CV, which even if it doesn't work out, you were like the managing director or the co-founder or the CEO. It sounds a lot better than being the assistant or the coordinator or the like middle manager, at some other big company that everyone else has on their CV. So yeah.
Fantastic. So I wanted to talk to you more about the traditional forms of media, print media, and I guess their push now to digital. So you're one of the front runners. Pedestrian is one of the front runners in there. Do you I don't want to use the word scared, but do you kind of get put off by the fact that your big players in the offline world are now moving to online? They've got a lot more money to do it. But hang on, you've got a big brand name as well. But how does that make you as a business?
Not really. I mean, I think like a lot of the offline companies that are coming into the webosphere, I kind of want them to work. Like I'm passionate about the news. I'm passionate about the fact that there's this sort of sense of glee sometimes in like, oh, look at the kind of old school traditional media dying and crumbling. But the old school traditional media really has a place, and I think I'd be really sad if the Sydney Morning Herald stopped being published or the Age stopped being published. And if anything, I kind of feel like it's you want guys like that, or the Guardian, or maybe not so much the Daily Mail, but quality journalism to go succeed and thrive because it has a really valuable place in society. In terms of like us being worried, we've been really big on building a brand from day one. We always wanted to, we were inspired by, it's a bit of a cliche, but brands like Virgin, and the fact that people really know what they stand for. They're so, everything they do, they put through that brand filter, and that's something that we're really big on. Like we've always been big on, Pedestrian's going to be a brand that stands for something. People should know what it means. Like if they come to a party that we throw, they should know what it should look like. If we, do a video, they should know what that should look like. We write an article, people should know what it looks like. And we have like a really, high level of quality control is what we try to really, maintain across like the site and everything we put out. So, and we also cater for like a kind of niche audience where I don't think there's actually many legacy offline sort of publishers playing within it. Most of those kind of bigger media companies are going for sort of, again, it's that broad, broad sweep of the kind of brush of like all people, or sort of all people aged 25 to 54, and it's this really broad target. They're not necessarily targeting young people.
Sure.
So to be honest, like probably like our kind of biggest competitors, or besides that we look around and we're competing against, are probably more digital players, from the US that have a large amount of kind of like venture capital funding and things like that. So sites like BuzzFeed and things launching in Australia are things that we're watching. As to whether they're having a huge impact on our business, not really. But it's obviously they're probably ones that we're like more staying attuned to as opposed to kind of like the traditional companies.
So how do you, with those type of companies coming into Australia, how do you stay ahead? You're a local company, but
we don't really I think a big policy and guideline that we've always had with Pedestrian is don't look at your competitors. Like the only time, because you just need to be. There's only so much you can do, and if you need to kind of focus on what you're doing. Any time that you spend on a competitor's website, or using the competitor's product, or playing around with their app or whatever, it's like time that you aren't spending on your product and making your product better, and investing into your product and thinking about your product and finding new ways and innovative ways to make your product better. As opposed to just kind of following the same old sort of formula, or falling into the trap of looking at the competitor and just chasing them. That's for us. And it's always worked well for us, I think. The only time I find myself looking at competitors is if I feel like I'm not doing a good enough job. And, then I'll start to look around and see what people are doing. And, was today really a slow news day, or did our editors not kind of, maintain the level that, we wanted them to. Most of the time it's just a slow news day, and you kind of see that when you kind of, have a look at all the other websites. And so I think kind of people can sometimes get wrapped up in that whole competitive thing, when really if they just focus on being better, they'd, it's better use of their energy.
Sure. Okay, I want to ask you some questions about the online learning aspect of the business, which is, I'm not sure if anyone has heard of Skillshare or those type of businesses in the US, which are kind of really well. There's actually General Assembly.
General Assembly, yeah, I was going to say.
in this building. So how is that going for you? I know you launched that last year. And what is your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting one. I think, like, you know, we're definitely entrepreneurs at heart, and so, you know, we've been running this business now for like 9.5 years, and, you know, when you do get a business that is sustainable and growing and, you know, kind of on its path to being a, like, you know, hopefully move from being a small to a medium-sized business, you still want to keep things interesting. And so one of those things for us is, like, you know, making sure that we are launching new and interesting products. So we were looking at the kind of like online education space. And, like, we've had 10,000 people register for classes and kind of attend classes over the last year. We've run like 50 classes across it. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be like, you know, like it's something there and it's something that our audience really responds to well, and the amount of positive feedback that we get from it and the impact that it has on our brand is really positive. But I don't necessarily think it's going to be like the future of our business, but it is something on there that, you know, is interesting, and it's been a really great kind of learning curve for us. So I think probably the biggest thing that we learned from that was that online education can actually be a really difficult thing to sell online. Like, when we first looked at it, we were kind of like, wow, isn't this great? Like, you know, we only charge like $10 or $15, or some of these classes are free. Surely they're going to get thousands of people, you know, paying that amount of money to like attend a class. Like, we had, say, the founders of Eventbrite, so the ticketing service, it's a $1 billion company, had tons of venture capital. Those guys didn't like a talk, and I think there was like about 100 people, you know, online, and that was actually, I think, free for like anyone to kind of log on and check out. And that's your kind of, you know, your initial hypothesis, and, you know, you're sort of seeing dollar signs and you're kind of seeing boats and Ferraris and all that shit. And but, you know, what usually happens is kind of reality kicks in, and then you realise, oh wait, the reason why, like, you know, a lot of learning is forced upon you. You know, you go to school and you have no choice but to go to school. For most people, university feels like something that they kind of have to do. And again, it's sort of something that they kind of have to do, and therefore they do it. But there's not that many people who actively seek out further learning, you know, when they don't really need it. And I think that's probably been the learning for us. Like, I don't know how, I haven't looked carefully at, you know, how, say, General Assembly or Skillshare are going as businesses. Like, but I mean, I do know that, you know, they're focusing on that, that's their thing, so I'm sure they'll be successful at it. For us, it was kind of like, you know, a bit of an experiment, and, you know, it's working to the point that we've had 10,000 people in a year sign up for it, so that's pretty good. But, and we're going to keep doing it, we're going to keep investing in it, finding new ways to make it work, but it's not going to be something that's going to take over from like our core business.
Sure, okay. So for those who don't know in the room, so Pedestrian TV was listed as, you know, one of BRW's Fast 100 companies last year. So first I want to know what sort of business decisions got you there, and how have you sort of acted since that sort of, I guess, listing or nomination?
Yeah, so we were on the BRW Fast 100 list in 2012 and 2013, and hopefully we'll be back on the list in 2014 if BRW is still doing the list. Interesting. And yeah, I mean, you know, in terms of business decisions, I suppose it's not being, you know, I think everyone wants their company to grow, hopefully. I mean, but not necessarily hopefully. Like, if you're in a business and you want it to grow, then, you know, the line behind that, once you start sort of, you know, seeing money come in, find ways to reinvest it, find ways to sort of, you know, have put more people or technology or investment into the thing that's actually driving revenue. That's really important. And, you know, don't kind of stop or give up. It's sort of, for me, it feels like it's just a natural thing. It's like, you know, the business is going well, you just keep investing in it, you keep pushing forward, making things happen, you know, not kind of being willing to settle or anything like that. But I mean, we've still got a huge amount of, you know, room to grow. You know, we've got things like overseas, or, you know, expansion still within Australia, or like, you know, like further audience growth or new products, or, you know, more investment in the video. There's a whole lot of things that we can do, that we are planning to do. And so, I mean, for us, it's sort of, you know, a list like that is the type of thing that, you know, we kind of probably want to be on for at least the next couple of years, hopefully. It does get harder as you get bigger, because, you know, to grow at the sort of rates that you need to grow as per, you know, the list, like, I think you need about 40% year-on-year average growth over the last 4 years. So as you start to, and I think the first year we got in, we just sort of crept in and we had about 45. I think the most recent year we had about, was it about 60% on average year-on-year growth. But at some point that gets a bit harder. Like it's a lot harder to grow at 50% if you're a $15 million company as opposed to if you're a $1 million company. It's a $1 million company. It's a lot harder for a $15 million company to start doing $22.5 million as opposed to a $1 million company to 1.5. So yeah.
Sure. Okay. Awesome. So as a startup founder, you probably have to wear a lot of hats. You probably have worn a lot of hats as businesses evolve. So what is your day-to-day sort of activities entail?
It's pretty varied. It's kind of like, you're sort of like, I kind of find at the moment, I'm sort of floating around to like whatever needs me the most. So, if sales is a bit quiet, I'll kind of like work with the sales team, make sure that they've got, all the like tools and the presentations and, we've developed like our advertising product, to the point where it needs to be. I might, start picking up the phone, going meeting with some clients and, pitching them ideas and concepts and, campaigns and telling them about the growth that we've had and things like that. If we need to improve editorial or we're growing the editorial team, then we'll be working with writers and kind of doing kind of like hiring and a lot of HR to find the right people and reading writing tasks and working with the editorial team on like kind of the vision and where the site's going and everything like that. I mentioned HR, that starts to become a pretty big part of your role. Like, when you've got 20, 25 people, we're not quite at the size yet where we can have a full-time or probably even a part-time like HR person, but, when you're hiring new people, get together the right people into your business is something that, we take really seriously, and it's something that I spend a lot of my time doing. So, the amount of nights that I've spent trawling LinkedIn, trying to find, people that might be from like have relevant backgrounds and then contacting them and saying that we're mates even though we're not. And then kind of, I'll probably have my LinkedIn account banned now because LinkedIn sees this. But, and then, getting in touch with them and, organising interviews and, things like that. We just hired a couple of new people from Melbourne, and I think as part of that interview process, I think I probably talked to about, probably looked at about 500 to 1,000 LinkedIn profiles and then probably did interviews with about 40 to 50 of those people to hire 2 people. So, but I think we've got the right 2 people, so that makes it all worthwhile. And it's, I think it's, the closest that I'll get to probably the next kind of 10 years to being like owning a sports team. So, but it feels like that. It's kind of fun. Like, you kind of get to like recruit these people and get the right people, and it's all about like getting a balance and like skill sets and team. And if you treat it like a game, it's more fun than it probably is. Then what else? Then just general sort of things that go in the company, like you might be talking to lawyers about like a legal issue, or you might be just making sure that kind of like as the business is growing, you're implementing the right processes so that things keep running efficiently. Because that sort of the number we're at isn't really like, it can be quite a painful number because you go from being this sort of small, tight-knit group of maybe 10, 12, 6, like those numbers are great because you're like a kind of family, and you kind of go through these ups and downs together. There's a lot of camaraderie, and then you start to become sort of 20, 25, and it's sort of like you're not a small business anymore, but you're not a kind of medium-sized or a big business. So all those things that you kind of want, like PAs for like the kind of senior managers or like HR people, like it's things that you're not quite there yet, and you're starting to grow into. And so just bringing in the right processes and making sure that things don't fall down and you're not kind of constantly putting out fires, starts to become a big part of the job. But, I think if you can like build in those processes and get everything working well, then the future's really bright. So, yeah. That's my day-to-day now. It's been different in the past.
Yeah. And so how do you ask us that are you co-directors of the company?
Yeah, well, like it's quite non-traditional in a way. Like in a lot of companies, there's a really big focus on, I know there needs to be one CEO, and the other person can be like a creative director or something like that. Interestingly, like we actually have very similar skill sets. So very different personalities, but very like similar skill sets. And so we kind of do a bit of everything, but we have kind of naturally found areas of the business that we sort of work kind of within. But it's some people kind of go, oh, you need to have like a sales and marketing co-founder and then a like technology co-founder if you're going to do an online venture. And I can definitely see the benefits of doing something like that. But probably the biggest thing when trying to find like a co-founder or a business partner is I think they're really valuable, and you should definitely, it's a lot more fun doing it with someone else because you get to kind of write the highs and the lows together. And I've never tried to start something up by myself, but I've had friends who've had business partners and then they've gone up and they've done, their second startup solo, and they sort of go like, it's actually a bit boring. Like, you have this great day and it's a great thing to sort of, celebrate. You've got no one to sort of celebrate it with. Whereas, if you've got a co-founder, you've also got that person you can turn around to, sharing that moment. But yeah, probably the biggest thing you just need to find is, regardless of their skill set, is just someone that you kind of get along with and your interests are aligned. And that's probably the biggest thing, just making sure that you both in it for the same reasons, you both have the same vision for where this thing can go, and yeah, like you kind of get on. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be a friend, like in the sort of sense of like, it doesn't mean you need to therefore start a business with like your best mate from high school or something, but it's just something that you kind of have a mutual respect for and you enjoy being around, and yeah, it's not kind of like stressful just seeing the person. So yeah.
Cool. I want to ask a couple more questions before I let someone else ask a question. So where do you see the next 9.5 years for Pedestrian TV? What do you envision?
Next 9.5 years for Pedestrian TV. I mean, growing the brand, like we still have a long way to grow. I think looking at the kind of numbers that we're doing now, so in February and March we had like our biggest months of traffic ever, and we broke the kind of like 1 million unique Australian browsers in the month kind of ceiling, or like we'd never kind of hit those type of numbers before, and we sort of like started to hit those numbers, which was really exciting for us, and it was a bit of a buzz. And in terms of year-on-year growth, that was quite large. Like it was about somewhere between 150% and 170%, each of those months. So at that time last year we were doing about 400,000 UVs. At the same time, I think we could take that figure within Australia to about 3 million, quite easily. There's about 40 million, unique sort of devices that people are kind of using across the web. I think we could easily, find 3, 4, 5 million and, really become a dominant player that starts to, have people like major radio stations like Nova and stuff like that go, which would lose like a Pedestrian, things like that. And then businesses, like a Nova, they're pulling in about $60 million of like, revenue a year or something like that in ad sales, and that's just in the Australian market. So, becoming a bigger media player to the point where, you go out on the street and you talk to any kind of young person, you're like, oh hey, like have you heard of Pedestrian.tv? And they're like, yeah, I know Pedestrian. And it's we're still not anywhere close to that. Like I think if you went out on the street now, you ask people if they know Pedestrian, I reckon like maybe 1 in 10 people would. That's a huge opportunity. Like 9 out of 10 people don't know your brand, they don't know your product. It's actually something to be really excited by, because if you can run a successful business with 1 out of 10 people knowing who you are, imagine what happens when 9 out of 10 people know who you are. So getting the business to that level in Australia, I think over the next couple of years we're definitely going to start to look at what overseas looks like as well. It's a different market to like the Australian market, because we would definitely be the small fish in the big pond again, whereas now it's starting to, at least within our competitive set, where we're now almost the big fish, which is kind of a strange feeling, because we've always been the kind of underdog, trying to like rise up the ranks. But in the US there's some really interesting companies like Vice Media has always been a big inspiration for us. When we started the company, they were a magazine that used to get distributed in about, I think, 16 countries around the world. It was a free magazine. They were probably a company that was maybe on paper worth about $30 million or something back then. They're now worth $1.4 billion. That was like 6 months ago. I think we both make a little bit more now. And they've done an amazing job of showing like a kind of new blueprint for what a media company can do and achieve. They play in the same space as us, in like youth and youth culture. They do it in quite a different way, and I think that while we're inspired by them in terms of like their business model, what we actually do from an editorial perspective is very different. But it is something that they've kind of created that blueprint, and I think what we in Australia, we're a lot bigger than Vice in terms of numbers. So I think if you can kind of say, well, look what we did in Australia, and you take that over to like the US or the UK or Asia or kind of Europe, like there's a really interesting opportunity there. So I think taking it to that point would probably take around 9.5 years. I mean, I mentioned Vice, like they've been around for about 20 years now. So, even though there's this cool youth brand, like they've been kicking around since 1994 or 5. So it takes, media is not kind of, if you're running a media company, it's never going to be the next Facebook. It's a slightly different model, but, ultimately, it's a really fun model. It brings together all the things I love, and yeah, that's what I'm doing.
So it sounds like you're in it for the long haul. There's no thoughts on being acquired by one of the big giants.
Oh, we're always open to conversations. We have lots of people knocking on our door and having chats to us and things. Completely independent, and by all accounts of talking to people, there's a lot of benefits of that. But it's who knows? It's I think it's always something that's probably in the back of your head. It does sort of feel sometimes when you have a successful business that you're continually sitting in this roulette table and you're kind of always you're betting on black, and then the money comes back and you won, and then you're betting on black again. You kind of keep going, and I think the entrepreneur in me is oh well, fuck it, take on anyone who comes, and then that's sort of I just had I've got 2 kids now, and I've got a wife and all that. And, that side of me is going shit, maybe I need to lock some stuff down, buy a bigger house, and all that type of stuff. So I don't know. It's we're open to conversations, but we do have a long-term vision of where the company's going to go. And yeah, we're passionate about building a big brand. That's what we want to do. So you can't you're not going to build a big brand if you sell out straight away. And, the first offer that comes along, not kind of focus on your vision.
Just want to put it to you guys if you have any questions. Chris? Sure. Yeah.
So, with appealing to a wider audience, do you worry that your editorial niche might expand out a bit much?
Sorry?
Do you worry about losing your editorial identity? Pedestrian's got quite a personality to it. But by trying to appeal to a broader audience, how do you keep it niche?
Yeah, it's not. We've never really aspired to be niche. We've aspired to target our audience, but the audience is quite broad. We sort of say that.
Demographic in mind when you're curating and creating.
Yeah, we've got a kind of idea of who our reader is in terms of the core reader, but in terms of the kind of target audience that we're trying to reach, it's sort of people 16 to 35, which is a pretty broad audience. And but in terms of probably the core of that is 20 to 25, and so the 35-year-old is reading it as someone who probably aspires to a slightly younger mindset, and the 15, 16, 17-year-old is reading it is one of those people that likes to kind of age up and get access to content that their friends aren't necessarily consuming. So I think we've managed to do a pretty good job. In Australia at the moment, we cover everything from politics to media to funny animal videos to celebrity, but we can kind of do it within our tone of voice and within our personality, and it works. So we have stories about boat people next to a story about Miley Cyrus, and because it's done with our kind of with the brand in mind, it works. And we do have a large amount of quality control. So for instance, we don't have interns writing for the site. A lot of publishing companies are filled with people that are it's oh, you work for me for free? Yeah, come in and write for my site and put stories up. But it's hard to retain quality if that's what you're doing. So yeah, so I'm not really concerned about whether we're going to run the risk of getting too broad. But I think it's interesting to see how much it can scale, because there's only so much news in a day. Is probably the thing that I'm starting to kind of feel a little bit, is that there's only so much going on that you can kind of report on, and then how do you kind of find other ways to sort of create news, because we can't, there's probably not enough news in Australia for us to put 100 editors into the site, for instance. At the moment we've got a team kind of between I think it's about 5 or 6 people, and we'll look to maybe take it to about 7 or 8, but at some point that might start to cap out, which is where we might need to start looking at overseas markets or new verticals and things as well. So for instance, we launched sport about a year and a half ago, and that's been quite successful, but we can still do a lot more coverage in that area, because at the moment we're only touching the surface of it. We launched the travel section of the site, so again, we're only really touching the surface of that. We can kind of go deeper on a lot of the verticals that we do write about. So yeah.
Who would you say the closest competitors for you are in Australia at the moment?
Closest competitors, as I said, it's not a conversation that I love getting into, because we don't spend a lot of time looking at them. But Fairfax owns a website called The Vine, which is a competitor in terms of like kind of what they try to do. But I don't necessarily think that, audience-wise, I was just looking at, like, not that I spent a lot of time looking at, but, like we were doing a kind of comparison to like an award that we're trying to enter. And, like in April so far, like, we're 2.5 times the size of it. And that's owned by Fairfax, it's owned by the traditional player. And, we're doing significantly better than they are. Who else? I mean, there's a few, like, kind of, emerging pop culture sites. Like there's a site called Junkie, which, has just launched. But again, like, I think if we look at the traffic figures of them for this month, and, we're about 11 times the size of them. Probably like, I'd say like BuzzFeed is the one that's like an interesting one. Like, at the same time, I love what they do, and I think there's definitely a place for it. It's very entertaining. But if I see like another list in my Facebook feed, I'll seriously kill someone. And it's funny because it's like that type of content works, but in a way that's why I kind of the lover of news in me really wants to see like The Guardian succeed and people like that, because you don't want all your news to be delivered in list form.
Yeah.
So, but that said, I do like what they do. Like they're innovating in the news space. If you actually click on the news tab, there's some pretty interesting content there. As to how much traffic that gets versus the huge lists, who knows? But I mean, again, BuzzFeed I think again has their kind of eyes set on the big news companies, not us. I don't think BuzzFeed's sitting in their offices going, oh, what's Pedestrian doing? They're going, what's news.com.au doing? What's the Sydney Morning Herald doing? And how are we going to, like, in our own way, take on those guys? I think we're kind of, and the business model is quite different as well. They're all about selling responsive posts, whereas we, are much more focused on kind of creating campaigns, and it's much more like the Vice model, where it's based around, using brands to find interesting, really great content and integrations across the site. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. How has social affected all of this? Like, 'cause I think you started maybe at the time social was Facebook was 2005.
Yeah, well, I mean, we originally had like a MySpace page, and that was kind of where we were first going. I think ever since having a MySpace page, we started to see the impact that social had. Like MySpace was actually pretty good for like publishing wasn't that dissimilar to like what Facebook does now for like companies and brands and everything like that. But yeah, social's huge. I mean, that is like a lot of our growth comes from social. It's also a really good barometer for how well you're doing and how good your content is. Nowadays you put a story out there, and if it's good, it'll find an audience. And if it's not great, you find out straight away. Like the difference between our top story and our bottom story in terms of like social reach, it just doesn't even like our lowest story will have like 4,000 social impressions or something. This is from we've got 72,000 fans at the moment, but our top stories can get like 800,000 or like 1 million or like impressions across Facebook. Like that's just people seeing the story. So it's a great distribution platform. At the same time, we are really focused on building our own channels as well. So we have our own email database, and even though I think everyone kind of like said that email's going to die, it's still there, and performs really well, and it's a channel that you can kind of control. I think Facebook keeps kind of playing around with their algorithm, and I think you can't just rely on Facebook to keep delivering for you. At the same time, there was an interesting quote again from like one of the BuzzFeed guys who was just like, Facebook's like a kind of it's like a TV. It's like television in terms of a medium, and that television is anything without the content that it puts in there. And so there's always going to be space for people creating great content. And so if you can create excellent content, then you'll find an audience for it. We really believe in that. So yeah, sure.
Anyone else?
At what point from when you started at the beginning did you consider bringing in ads or introducing ads to the site? And what was your sort of thinking at the time about how to approach that?
Well, I mean, for us, we worked in like a media agency, so we worked in a company that placed ads in other like publications, and so our model from day one was ad funded. So it was literally before the company even like started, that was the model. So we knew that if we wanted to get the product off the ground, we weren't charging for it. It was it wasn't being sold to anyone. We had to fund it with that. So the first product we released was that DVD magazine. The day after we had our last day at work and went out there, like we opened up a spreadsheet, started calling, clients, looking at the white pages, talking to marketing managers and people like that. Yeah, we had, these terrible suits on that we probably wore to our Year 12 formals, and we're going out and meeting clients and explaining to them this product that hadn't never been done anywhere in the world, and explaining why they should kind of give us their money. And it, we managed to get some sponsors on board. Like BMW Mini was an amazing brand. They came on board as the sponsor of issue 1 as like a trial, and they ended up being our sponsor for like the first 12 or 13 issues of the DVD. So like the first couple of years, like we had to keep kind of pitching back to them and showcasing how we were going to kind of bring their brand to life. But we kept doing that. Who else did we have on the first issue? I think EMI gave us some money, for the first issue and things like that. So yeah, it was always part of the plan. Like that was our business model, and still largely is that it's it's an ad-funded model, it's publishing.
So you just had the one issue at first, and you kind of went around and showed that to people.
Yeah, we didn't even have that entire issue. Like what we did was we kind of created a prototype or whatever. Yeah, so it was a mock-up of the product, but we filmed what was going to be one of the key features of the issue. We had the DVD kind of set up how it would run. So we would go into the meeting, we'd play it. We had a showreel or an explainer of the product in the first kind of 1 or 2 minutes. Then it went to a menu screen. We'd show people the menu screen. We'd show them how they pick content. Then we'd select the segment that we'd pre-filmed, which was a piece on the kind of the denim brand Subi, which back in the mid 2000s was a big deal, and now it's kind of sort of almost disappeared. But at the time it was a big deal, and we filmed this piece of content with them. It was great. It was about 8 minutes or 9 minutes. Previously, the only other interview they'd done was I think 60 minutes. So the tone of ours was very different to anything they did in 60 minutes, and it stood out. And it was a brand that everyone was talking about at the time, and this was this you could see it come to life before your eyes. So yeah, so we went out and we kind of pitched, and it was always part of our kind of plan as our because that's the sort of publishing model. We were never kind of trying to sell something for a cover price or anything like that. Yeah.
Is the way that you guys do the ads, because right now I think it's there's a soul brand. It's a colours.
Yeah.
Around it.
Yeah.
Was it always like that? The way it sort of.
It's
because I guess my question is, did it evolve at some point from sort of just being advertisers pay you just like the rights to being a partner with the ad company?
No, again, it was always part of the role, and I think they've always been kind of partners. It's always been about sort of how do we do something more interesting with you. And it's funny because everyone talks about native content at the moment, but to be honest, if you weren't, I'm surprised that people are only having this conversation now. I feel like back in the day, we were doing native content in 2005 because we had to. Because, we were like, well, how are we going to convince Mini to give us money? So we were like, well, we'll take the stretch Mini that you have, and we'll have our presenter driving around it, and it'll just be there. It's product placement. It's getting brands within content, while still disclosing interest and not being sneaky or underhanded. But it's always been about kind of having advertisers as partners, having the advertising being integrated, delivering a good service for advertisers. I think a lot of the time people sort of are oh no, I'm the publisher and the advertiser's secondary. But I think you do need to understand that you've got to have commercial interest if you want to be, run a big company.
So yeah, for a young company, I guess, being a close partner with brands is sort of not only maybe your only option, but it's sort of the best option.
If you're looking to do a brand-funded, advertiser-funded product, but there's examples of where that's not the case. I mean, I think probably Worthy, for instance, has many browsers, got a lot of traction across their site. I think they run off a similar kind of more native kind of angle, so you don't see ads possible like Upworthy, but they've basically created kind of content distribution platforms where they can then work with brands and think on content and messages that the brand can put out. I think that's their business model, don't hold to that. So there's other ways to do it, and by all means, I think people finding new ways to kind of monetize and make money from publishing is what things are about. You don't have to have big skills all over your site and things like that. But it kind of works for us, but it doesn't mean it's the kind of rules. So yeah.
Cool. Anything else? All right, big round of applause for Chris. Chris has got to go to a basketball game, that's why he was whispering in my ear.